Rhaegar Targaryen stood on the battlements of the Red Keep as the early sun gilded King's Landing in gentle shades of gold. It was the hour of the wolf, and the city below lay in that fragile hush between night and dawn when all the rowdy sounds of drunken men and snarling dogs gave way to a profound, quivering stillness. The prince's silver-gold hair caught the morning light, shimmering like a half-forgotten dream. He closed his violet eyes for just a moment. If he breathed deeply enough, he thought, he might catch some whiff of the future on the breeze, whether it promised heartbreak and flames or hope and restoration. But that sense of destiny eluded him, dancing just beyond conscious reach, as elusive as the whisper of harp strings. The future rarely yielded its secrets easily. As the son of the once beloved, now mad King Aerys II, he had grown up beneath the looming weight of his father's deeds. Yet Rhaegar did not let the swirl of rumor and the threat of treachery numb him into inaction. Too many of the lords whispered about the king's instability in private, while outwardly maintaining a veneer of politeness. Rhaegar had spent his youth reading every tome and ancient scroll he could find in the Red Keep's libraries, absorbing the lessons of rulers past, from valiant triumphs to dark follies. He had taught himself the songs of old, learned to speak softly and persuasively, and above all, listen to the hearts of men. He was no stranger to the tapestry of longing and fear that bound the seven kingdoms together. He had never needed steel to forge his popularity among certain lords and ladies. His gentleness of manner, his poetic inclinations, and his open ear to their concerns had done as much to bolster his reputation as his skill in arms ever could. And he was skilled. In the yard, clad in polished plate, the Dragon Prince carried a certain quiet deadliness. His days of training under the greatest knights of the realm had not been wasted. But always he remembered that war was a brutal business best avoided. If he were to inherit the throne from his father, he yearned to do so through reason, negotiation, and the gradual restoration of trust in House Targaryen. For too long, the Seven Kingdoms had lived under the cloud of his father's rule. There had been no single moment that had spelled King Aerys' decline. Rather, it had arrived in incremental steps, small cruelties, paranoia, outbursts of rage, all culminating in a slow decimation of the realm's goodwill toward House Targaryen. The rebellious murmurings in the corners of great halls were not without cause. Tales of Aerys' unpredictable moods, his dangerous edicts, and the nightmarish cruelty he inflicted on those who displeased him spread like a poisonous vine. Rhaegar knew that if a civil war erupted, it would be savage and merciless. The realm would bleed and the rivers would run red with the cost of Targaryen madness. He refused to let that happen. There was a time he might have been resigned to taking up arms for the sake of the realm to remove his father. Duty could demand that a son dethrone his sire if it saved the people. But Rhaegar had begun to see a path that did not depend on swords clashing and houses ablaze. He believed in softly woven alliances, in forging peace with words before steel. And so, over the past year, he had traveled throughout the Seven Kingdoms, quietly establishing relationships with key lords and ladies, seeing the country beyond King's Landing for himself. He learned the tragedies and triumphs that shaped each region, whether Dorne's proud independence, the North's harsh winters, the Vale's sky-piercing mountains, or the Riverland's heartbreak under the weight of repeated conflicts. Everywhere, he spoke kindly, listened diligently, and promised to be a better king than his father. He made no threats, offered no bribes. Instead, he showed his earnest heart, letting them see for themselves a prince who wished for better days. He garnered trust and affection, small seeds that he fervently hoped would sprout before the realm's darkness deepened to the point of no return. For there were many, even among Targaryen loyalists, who recognized that the king's mind was too far gone, too consumed by twisted fears, to continue ruling effectively. If only there were a way to replace him peacefully. That had been Rhaegar's abiding dream. He was drawn from his musings as the first stirrings of life sounded from the castle below, the clang of a kitchen pot, the low murmur of servants, and the crow of a distant rooster from the city's outskirts. Rhaegar raised his face to the wind one last time before descending. He moved through the corridors of the Red Keep, greeting guards and servants with a polite nod, neither condescending nor aloof. His footsteps led him to his father's chambers. The day of final persuasion had come at last. King Aerys' private apartments were guarded by unsmiling men, not the king's guard but men the king trusted implicitly, dark, sullen sorts who seemed always watchful, always waiting for some invisible blade. They parted to admit Rhaegar without a word, for they knew better than to provoke the prince. Inside, the chamber was dimly lit by an array of twisted candles that filled the room with flickering shadows. The entire place smelled faintly of hot wax, dried spittle, and a staleness that made Rhaegar's stomach clench. Once this had been a bright suite, a place where Queen Rhaella had danced with her ladies, where small gatherings had been held. Now it felt like a crypt. King Aerys was huddled near the fireplace, though the morning was already warm. He seemed perpetually cold these days, as if no fire was hot enough. His silver hair had grown thin and his beard unkempt. Once in a while, a spark of the man he had been flickered in his eyes, a vestige of the cunning statesman and witty court presence, but it was overshadowed by fear. Fear of imagined enemies, fear of invisible traitors, fear that everyone around him wanted him dead. "Father," Rhaegar said softly, approaching. "I have come to speak with you." Aerys turned, eyes narrowed. "Have you, my boy? You bring news of conspiracies? Or more demands that I step aside?" His voice quavered and cracked, bitter at the edges. "It seems I am to be dethroned in my own castle by my own flesh and blood." Rhaegar knelt, head bowed. "No such thing, father," he murmured. "I come only to speak of the realm's welfare. Of how you might find peace and comfort in your later years, free of the burden of rule." Aerys's laugh rasped in his throat. "Peace? Comfort? Do you think me a fool? Who has softened your mind with these illusions?" He pointed a trembling finger, knuckles bony beneath the skin. "It is too late for illusions, Rhaegar." The prince rose slowly, pressing his lips into a gentle smile he hoped would reassure the terrified, haunted man before him. "It is never too late if we have love in our hearts," he said. "I would see you live in quiet dignity, honored as a king who chose to pass the reins when he deemed it best for the realm. We have lost so much, father. Must we lose more? Must the realm break into war? I do not want the tragedy of steel on steel. I do not want your name cursed for centuries." "Cursed," Aerys muttered, voice like dead leaves scraping across stone. "They cursed me the day I sat the throne. They love you more than they ever loved me, yes? The White Knights treat you like a living god. The lords treat you like a wise prophet. Even Tywin Lannister," he broke off, spittle flecking his lips. "All conspire." Rhaegar felt a surge of compassion. Stepping forward, he laid a hand on his father's arm. "No one conspires to harm you, father. We only wish to help." Aerys jerked away, though not quite with the anger he had shown in months past. He seemed so small under the weight of his robes, so fragile. "Then help me stay on this throne," he rasped, eyes lost in the flicker of firelight. "Help me keep what is mine. If that is truly what you wish." Rhaegar paused, letting his father hear the uncertainty in his tone. "Then let me do so in a way that ensures the realm's peace. Lend me your authority. Let me be your hand in all things, to ensure that discontent does not explode into open rebellion." The king said nothing for a long while. Then, with a croak, "You want my throne, don't you? You plan to take it piece by piece, like hungry crows. If you will it, I shall serve you until your last breath. And I will keep your legacy intact. Let us not be crows, but father and son, Targaryen and Targaryen, shaping a tomorrow that will not be drenched in blood." Rhaegar's voice trembled with sincerity. "Let us heal this kingdom." Aerys closed his eyes, and for a moment Rhaegar feared he might shriek in order to have his son hauled away to the dungeons. But the king only let out a long sigh, as though his last reserves of energy were draining from his body. "Go," he whispered. "Do what you will. I am tired." It was neither outright abdication nor final acceptance, but it was the closest Rhaegar had come. He bowed once more, pressing his forehead to his father's withered hand. "Thank you," he murmured. "You will not regret this, father." Yet when Rhaegar stepped back into the corridor, his heart felt heavy. Aerys had indeed yielded some measure of power, but he was not yet parted from the throne. That meant the realm was still not entirely safe from his father's paranoid swings. But it was a beginning, and Rhaegar knew that everything must begin in small steps, a gentle coaxing of fate rather than a forceful hand. He could only hope the lords across the realm would see that he was not seeking violent coups. He was seeking stability. Weeks passed, and Rhaegar's position as the de facto ruler grew firmer. An official decree was issued by the Royal Council, signed and sealed by King Aerys himself, albeit reluctantly, naming Prince Rhaegar as His Grace's regent and protector of the realm in matters of governance. It allowed him to oversee the day-to-day affairs, handle petitions, and enact new policies for the betterment of the Seven Kingdoms. The effect was immediate. Lords who had once tiptoed around the Red Keep, uncertain of the king's mood, began to arrive in larger numbers, each seeking to parley with the crown in safer circumstances. Rhaegar listened to their grievances. He reviewed old taxes that had weighed too heavily on certain regions. He curtailed the demands that had drained coffers in the name of the king's pet projects, like building extravagant scorpions or hiring pyromancers to stoke the hidden stockpiles of wildfire. He made known that the realm was to be nurtured, not bled, and that justice would be swift but fair. A hush of cautious optimism fell across King's Landing as the small folk witnessed these changes. Fewer goldcloaks patrolled the streets with menacing authority. Instead, some were tasked with ensuring that bread and supplies reached the city's poorest corners, a policy Rhaegar quietly funded from the royal treasury, making up for the king's past neglect. Rumors flew among the tavern folk of Flea Bottom that perhaps the Targaryens were not all the same after all, that Prince Rhaegar had a gentle soul, that he might indeed bring about a new age. Yet in the Red Keep, shadows still lurked. King Aerys would not simply vanish, and his fits of rage had not ceased entirely. From time to time, he would wander out into the halls, cursing at invisible traitors, or lash out at servants for the smallest perceived slight. More than once, Rhaegar had to intervene, calming him with soothing words or simply insisting on his father's rest, discreetly clearing the halls so the king's dignity might not be too tarnished by his decline. But the lords who once quivered in fear at the sight of Aerys now placed their hopes in the prince. And so, Rhaegar's days were filled with council meetings, with negotiations to restore alliances and heal old wounds. He had not forgotten his youthful fascination with prophecy, nor the sweet solace he found in music. But those passions had to wait. The realm needed him to be strong, present, and wise. He found unexpected support in certain key individuals. Jon Connington, a steadfast friend and fiery presence, offered Rhaegar fierce loyalty. Arthur Dayne of the Kingsguard remained an unwavering champion of Rhaegar's cause, gently guiding the younger knights to see the prince's vision. And there were others, too. Oberyn Martell visited the capital with a mixture of curiosity and caution, reluctant to trust any Targaryen after the shadows of the past. Yet he found in Rhaegar a man who listened to Dorne's grievances, respected Elaya's homeland, and wished to rectify the slights that had once stirred tension. Each small victory came at the cost of countless hours of careful diplomacy, but Rhaegar persevered. All the while, Rhaegar wondered if his father might grow jealous enough, fearful enough, to lash out in a last desperate gasp of monarchy. He prepared contingencies, contacts in every region who could gather men swiftly if needed, not to bring war but to defend the innocent if Aerys lost his mind completely. He prayed to the Seven it would never come to that. One crisp autumn morning, he learned that Tywin Lannister had arrived at the gates of King's Landing, leading a grand retinue of bannermen and knights. The Lannisters had been a silent but towering force ever since Tywin's abrupt resignation as Hand of the King years ago. Rumor had it that Tywin had grown weary of Aerys's humiliations. There was tension enough there to start a war in an instant if handled poorly. But Rhaegar had extended an olive branch, inviting Tywin to come and witness the new direction of the realm under the regency. So here he was, leaning on his gilded carriage and stepping into the Red Keep as though he owned it. Rhaegar greeted him in the throne room, not upon the Iron Throne, but standing at the base of its steps, dressed in black and red finery. Tywin bowed his head in acknowledgement. It was the slightest bow that courtesy allowed. Rhaegar gave him a measured smile. The old lion did not smile in return. They spoke at length behind closed doors, of grievances, of old wounds, of the humiliations Tywin felt at being cast aside by a king he had served so well. Rhaegar did not refute those grievances. He listened, apologized on behalf of the crown, and promised that he would endeavor to rule with the best counsel possible. He extended the position of Hand of the King once more to Tywin, but the Lannister lord refused. "I have no desire to dance on a rug that may be pulled out from under me again," Tywin said with cool directness. "Not while your father still lives." Rhaegar inclined his head in acceptance. "I understand. Yet I hope you might lend me your wisdom and support in some capacity. I would offer you a seat on the small council or any other role you desire." Tywin's eyes flickered. "I desire no official role for now. But if you are sincere about bridging the divide, I will consider offering you the occasional counsel." That was the best Rhaegar could hope for. He thanked Tywin and began forging a tentative alliance. There would be no war with Casterly Rock so long as Rhaegar lived up to his promises. It was progress. The realm watched carefully. With Tywin's neutrality, a major threat to peace dissolved. The next challenge was to ensure the stability of the entire realm under a single voice. Enough fractures remained that any spark could set off rebellion. Lord Rhaegar Stark was an old ally. The North had little love for Aerys after certain past incidents, but Rhaegar's courtesy, combined with his personal respect for the Stark house, kept them firmly on his side. So it went, from the Vale to the Reach, along an arduous process of weaving old loyalties into new patterns, ensuring that House Targaryen could still be seen as rightful rulers, not tyrants. Months trickled into a year, and that year threatened to trickle into another. Finally came the day all had begun to wonder about, King Aerys's public ceding of power. In truth, he had grown too weak in mind and body to actively fight Rhaegar's regency. The only question was whether he would cling to the throne until death, or if Rhaegar could persuade him to step down, ensuring a peaceful transition that the realm so desperately needed. One night, a hush fell over the Red Keep as word spread that the king had collapsed in his chambers, feverish and rambling. The maesters rushed to tend to him, but they found little they could do except keep him comfortable. Rhaegar remained at his bedside for hours, turning away courtiers who hovered like carrion birds. Aerys raved about dragons and wildfire, about traitors in the walls, about how they would all burn. Sometimes he mistook Rhaegar for a younger version of himself. Other times he flinched away in terror. At the apex of the fever, he grabbed Rhaegar's wrist with surprising force. "They want my blood," he gasped, eyes shining with delirium. "They want my life. They want the dragon undone." "I will protect you, father," Rhaegar said softly, though tears burned the corners of his eyes. "I will guard your legacy." Aerys's grip loosened and the wild fear in his gaze melted into a sort of resignation. "Swear it." "I swear it. On my honor as a prince. On the name Targaryen." Aerys blinked rapidly, and for just an instant, clarity passed over his face. "Rhaegar," he whispered. "You look so much like I did so many years ago." He coughed, his body racked by spasms. "I was once beloved too." That was the last coherent sentence he spoke. The fever lingered for days, leaving him incoherent. When it finally broke, Aerys was weaker than ever before, seemingly oblivious to the world around him. In that moment, Rhaegar made the heart-wrenching choice. He convened the council, summoning the greatest lords, the Kingsguard, and the high officers of the realm. Before that august assembly, Rhaegar read aloud a prepared statement, gentle in wording yet unambiguous in meaning. King Aerys II was no longer fit to rule. By the will of the council and the spirit of the law, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen would ascend as King Rhaegar I in a peaceful and merciful transition, and King Aerys would live out his remaining days in gentle care, free from the burdens of the throne. There was no triumphant cheering, only a solemn silence, for this was a sorrowful necessity. The lords bent the knee each in turn. The Kingsguard, led by Ser Gerald Hightower and Ser Arthur Dayne, knelt before the new king. Rhaegar felt the weight of the moment pressed down on him, 1,000 memories of the realm's tragedies, 1,000 hopes for its future. Thus, without the clang of swords or the roar of dragonfire, the realm saw the end of Aerys's reign and the dawning of Rhaegar's. All of King's Landing buzzed with the news. For the first time in living memory, a Targaryen had passed the throne peacefully, albeit under duress of health and madness. The small folk prayed for the new king. The lords readied themselves to see whether this promised peace would truly take root. On the day of his coronation, Rhaegar wore simple regalia, silver mail beneath dark red robes, the three-headed dragon of his house embroidered over his breast. The crown was not his father's twisted, dragon-claw circlet, but the slim band of Valyrian steel and rubies that once belonged to the greatest Targaryen kings. He had found it in the vaults, dusty but intact. As he placed it upon his head, he whispered a vow to the Seven that he would not repeat the mistakes of his forebears. In the great September of Baelor, before the statues of the Seven, the High Septon anointed him with holy oils. There, in front of the noble houses, Rhaegar promised to uphold justice, mercy, and wisdom. His voice echoed through the sept, strong yet tremulous with emotion. He looked out over the sea of faces, the lords and ladies, the knights, even the quiet figures of the small folk permitted to witness the occasion. Their expressions ranged from reverent hope to cautious skepticism. He took that as a challenge to prove himself worthy. The ceremony ended with the tolling of bells, their sonorous peals ringing out across King's Landing. For that day, at least, the city erupted in celebrations, feasts, and dancing in the streets. Wine flowed freely in Flea Bottom's taverns. Bards sang ballads about the Dragon of the Dawn, weaving fresh myths around Rhaegar's name. Even the gloom of the Red Keep lifted somewhat, as if the ghost of Aerys's madness had receded into the walls. But Rhaegar knew that the real test lay beyond these festivities. Being crowned was easy compared to ruling well. Any new king could put on a golden circlet and wave to adoring crowds. maintaining the peace, forging unity among the fractious lords, and addressing the kingdom's deep-rooted woes. That was the labor that could break lesser men. Within days, Rhaegar set about reforming the royal council. He named John Connington as the master of coin, trusting his friend's diligence and ambition. He persuaded Dor and Martell, if not to serve on the council, then to send a trusted envoy to represent Dorne's interests, striving to knit those alliances with deeper understanding. The Dornish demanded justice for prior mistreatment and sought to ensure that their voices would be respected in the new reign. Rhaegar granted them those assurances, mindful of his late wife Elaya's memory and her enduring legacy in that proud land. To replace his father's loyal pyromancers, Rhaegar employed more reputable scholars and engineers, turning away from the hoarding of wildfire that had once so enchanted the Mad King. He began slowly dismantling the hidden caches beneath King's Landing, a daunting and secretive process. He wished to remove that threat of fiery apocalypse, never again giving madness the chance to consume the city. Each cache discovered was carefully neutralized with the help of discreet, well-paid experts. It did not take long for rebellious sparks to flare in remote corners of the Seven Kingdoms. Some ambitious lords saw the transition as a sign of weakness. In the Stormlands, a local lord tried to claim independence, refusing to pay taxes and raiding neighbors. Rhaegar responded not with ravaging armies but with a measured show of force. He sent a contingent of royal soldiers led by a trusted Kingsguard knight and a written plea for parley. The rebellious lord believed the new king to be soft. He underestimated Rhaegar's resolve. After refusing to speak and killing a royal messenger, the rebel found his keep besieged for weeks. In the end, he surrendered when his men realized Rhaegar's forces were not there for plunder or cruelty, but for justice. The rebel lord was stripped of his lands and titles. Rhaegar then installed a more loyal relative in his place, mandating fair governance for the small folk. Word spread that King Rhaegar would not tolerate lawlessness or betrayal, yet neither did he revel in punishment. The next challenge came from across the sea. Rumors drifted that the free cities caught wind of the new reign and speculated on the Targaryen line's strength. Merchants tried to angle for advantageous treaties. Rhaegar welcomed those negotiations, dispatching envoys to Braavos, Pentos, and Volantis, in hopes of rekindling economic prosperity. He believed that a stable and prosperous kingdom would quell internal unrest better than 1,000 swords at the border. While the crown busied itself with these labors, King Aerys lingered in a private suite of the Red Keep, under constant care. He recognized no one, not even Rhaegar. Some days he mumbled about flames dancing in the dark. Other days he wept silently, calling for the sons he feared had betrayed him. But the realm had moved on. As Rhaegar had wished, there was no orchestrated humiliation of the former king, only a slow, mournful fade. Often, Rhaegar would visit, sitting by the bed and playing quiet melodies on his harp, remembering the father who had once been a spirited man in his youth. It was a strange mercy, this half-death, a testament to the fragility of power. In the second year of his reign, Rhaegar faced a test from the north. A band of wildlings had crossed the wall in larger numbers than usual, threatening the lands of the Stark bannermen. While not a direct challenge to the crown, it demanded swift action. Rhaegar conferred with Lord Ricard Stark, who was aging but still possessed a formidable presence. The king pledged royal resources to assist the Night's Watch in repelling the threat. He did so not with arrogance, but in genuine partnership, dispatching a portion of the crown's forces as well as supplies. This was a departure from the past, where the crown often disregarded the troubles beyond the wall. The result was a swift and decisive pacification of the wildlings, with minimal bloodshed and some measure of humane treatment for captives. The North, long accustomed to being overlooked, was impressed. Small gestures of reciprocity emerged, more trade caravans, more direct involvement in southern markets, bridging the gap between North and South. That bridging process exemplified Rhaegar's approach. Wherever the realm had once been fractious, he tried to weave it together with personal attention, respect for local customs, and a genuine desire for unity. This required near-constant travel. He took progress tours through the Westerlands, the Reach, and the Riverlands, meeting not only high lords but the small folk themselves. He wanted to see with his own eyes how they lived, what they lacked, and how best to serve them. The presence of a king, regal yet approachable, stirred awe in every village he passed. Over cups of ale and fresh bread he listened to tales of marauding bandits or harrowing harvests. Some accounts broke his heart, prompting him to adjust certain taxes, fund new roads, or offer seeds and farming tools to battered communities. He never forgot his own heritage, though. In the shadow of the Targaryen dynasty lay dragons, real and symbolic. Rhaegar tried to resurrect the better part of that legacy, the notion of a unifying symbol for the Seven Kingdoms. But he was also mindful that the Targaryen line had committed grave sins. He neither denied nor excused them. Instead, he strove to show that House Targaryen could be redeemed in the eyes of the people. In many ways, his greatest struggle was against the fear and bitterness left behind by generations of rule, culminating in his father's tyrannies. Yet slowly that fear gave way to cautious trust. The people saw that Rhaegar was sincere, that he did not lash out or cling to archaic notions of absolute supremacy. He sought to rule, not subjugate. Midway through his second year as king, Rhaegar decided upon another bold step. He would call a great council, inviting every high lord, along with maesters and learned men, to discuss the realm's future, possible reforms, and the forging of a more stable order. He wanted them to speak openly, to bring forth solutions rather than simply airing grievances. The realm's history had countless examples of councils, but rarely had a Targaryen king called one not out of desperation but out of genuine desire for collaboration. The council was held in Harrenhal, its vast hall able to accommodate a larger gathering than the Red Keep. Memories of past events weighed heavily upon Rhaegar when he set foot in that cursed fortress where once he had sung songs of prophecy and enthralled audiences. It still loomed like a dying giant, its towers melted by dragonfire centuries ago. But Rhaegar refused to let Harrenhal's dark past overshadow the potential of the gathering. Lords great and small arrived, and for a fortnight they debated everything from trade policies to the rights of small folk in regional courts. At times, the discourse grew heated. Men who had nursed old feuds for generations found themselves in the same hall, compelled to speak face to face. But Rhaegar moderated, keeping a calm presence, reminding them all that the realm stood on a precipice, slip back into division and chaos, or step forward into an era of unity. One of the more contentious issues was the question of inheritance laws and the role of women in succession. Dorne had long practiced equal primogeniture, while other regions clung to male preference traditions. Rhaegar, mindful of his own beloved Elaya's dignity and the Dornish pride, allowed space for that debate to flourish. In the end, no sweeping realm-wide decree was passed, but Rhaegar strongly encouraged respect for regional customs. It was a compromise, but it hinted at a time when the realm might unify such laws. Still, even as the council progressed, Rhaegar felt the flicker of old grudges, the tension that simmered beneath polite conversation. Men like Walder Frey seethed at not being granted more influence, the Ironborn muttered about a desire for more independence, the Reach Lords eyed each other for power plays. Peace was not a static prize. It was an ongoing negotiation, one that demanded vigilance and constant empathy. Yet, when the Great Council concluded, many regarded it as a tentative success. It did not solve every problem nor magically erase distrust, but it allowed lords from distant corners of the kingdom to see that King Rhaegar was genuine in his desire to rule fairly. They had witnessed him personally, day after day, patiently listening, mediating disputes, proposing concessions. They had seen him treat the highest lord and the humblest knight with equal courtesy. And so they departed Harrenhal with stories to share, stories of a Targaryen king who might just be different. Back at the Red Keep, Rhaegar continued his reforms. He poured royal funds into rebuilding roads to ensure safer travel and trade. He looked into establishing new schools for the small folk with the maester's help, believing that a more educated populace would strengthen the realm in the long run. He also sought out wise men and women from across the kingdoms to form an advisory body specifically focused on agriculture and resource management so that the kingdom's bounties might be shared more widely and famines prevented. Through all this, he carried an unspoken sorrow for his own personal life. Elia Martell had borne him children before her tragic passing in the original timeline of events. But in this alternate flow of time, in this peaceful transition, Elia was still by his side, quietly radiant, though her health was delicate. The stress of childbearing had taken its toll, leaving her exhausted by the two children she had delivered, a daughter, Rhaenys, and a son, Aegon. Rhaegar adored them both, yet he worried incessantly for Elaya's fragile health. She would have shining moments, laughing with their children in the gardens or dancing in a rare feast, but then she would fall ill, confined to her chambers for weeks. He stayed at her side whenever possible, reading her poems or playing the harp softly to lull her to rest. Though she smiled for him, he could see the weariness etched into her. Dorne's hot climate would be gentler on her, the maester said, but her duties as queen consort required her presence in King's Landing. Rhaegar wondered if he might build a summer palace in the Dornish marches, a place where the dryness of the air might ease her condition. His duties often tore him away, and though he tried to be an attentive husband, the weight of the crown pressed heavily. In time, tragedy struck. After a prolonged bout of fever, Elia passed away during an unusually cold winter's night, leaving a kingdom to mourn a beloved queen. For Rhaegar, it was a deep personal blow. The realm's lords and small folk grieved alongside him, for Elia had won their hearts with her graciousness and strong Dornish spirit. Her death served as a reminder that even in peacetime, sorrow and loss were inescapable. Rather than retreat into despair, Rhaegar channeled his grief into further dedication. He immersed himself in caring for his children, ensuring that Rhaenys and Aegon would grow up with all the love he could give. He named Arthur Dayne as one of their principal guardians, along with Ashera Dayne, who doted on them. House Martell remained staunchly loyal, touched by Rhaegar's devotion to Elia. Doran Martell especially seemed to grow fonder of the king, forging a bond deeper than mere political alliance. With the grief of Elia's passing, the realm witnessed a humbler side of Rhaegar. He no longer spoke of grand prophecies or seemed lost in the mystical dreams of his youth. Instead, he walked the earth with both feet firmly planted, confronting the day's challenges with steady resolve. His once perfect harp songs were now tinged with a melancholic depth that moved all who heard them. So passed the 3rd and 4th years of his reign, a time of consolidation, healing, and modest prosperity. The small folk of King's Landing felt safer than they had in a generation. The roads leading to the city bustled with trade. The harvests were not always bountiful. Nature had its own cycles, but whenever famine threatened, the crown's newly formed resource council acted swiftly, distributing grain from better-faring regions to those in need. Many lords found that while they missed the absolute freedom to impose their own will on their vassals, they valued the sense of belonging to a stronger, fairer kingdom. Of course, not everything was utopian. Rivalries still simmered. Some houses whispered that Rhaegar was too idealistic, that eventually reality would crash upon him. There were lords who yearned for more personal power, men who grumbled that they could not enrich themselves with the same ease under the new system. But no major rebellions gained traction, for the people largely favored the king, and even the nobility recognized that open defiance would not be welcomed by their peers. A sense of watchful harmony settled over Westeros, like a sea once roiled by storms, slowly calming under soft winds. Meanwhile, across the sea, Essos looked on with renewed interest. Traders brought back glowing reports of King Rhaegar's stable government and the rebirth of trust in the crown. Essosi bankers were more willing to lend gold for infrastructural projects, seeing a lower risk in the realm's future. Rhaegar, always balancing caution with ambition, accepted certain loans for the construction of new harbors and the expansion of shipyards in the Crownlands. He believed that trade routes could be the lifeblood of a peaceful kingdom, tying prosperity together with invisible threads of coin and commerce. At the heart of all these efforts lay Rhaegar's guiding principle. If the crown served the realm's best interests, small folk and highborn alike, then the realm would in turn serve the crown with loyalty, safeguarding it from the need for violent crackdowns. Where his father had demanded obedience through fear, Rhaegar invited cooperation through respect. He was not naive. He posted watchers, maintained a capable standing army, and made it clear that any who threatened the peace would be dealt with firmly. But he also ensured that no threat festered from neglect. He confronted problems early and directly. By the 5th year of his reign, the realm had grown accustomed to life under King Rhaegar's steady hand. Children born during this era would grow up thinking that Targaryen kings were wise and just not dangerous and mad. Minstrels sang of a gentle dragon. Lords began to compete for favor not through displays of military might, but through demonstrations of wise stewardship, how well they managed their lands, how generously they hosted the king on his progress tours. In the bustling corridors of the Red Keep, one could sense the quiet pride that the realm had avoided the devastation of civil war. A secret, deeper transformation was taking place within the king himself. He had spent so much time forging alliances and overseeing day-to-day governance that he found little time for prophecy, for old Valyrian scrolls, or for the esoteric lore he had once devoured. Yet in the rare moments he allowed himself reflection, he would recall the haunting words of old texts. The prince that was promised, the song of ice and fire. Had he strayed from a destiny that demanded strife and dragons? If war was truly a crucible for forging heroes, Then by evading it, had he doomed the realm to a slower doom? Those questions lingered in the corners of his mind, especially on cold nights when the wind rattled the windows of Rhaegar's holdfast. Sometimes he dreamed of a great darkness creeping in from the far north, unstoppable and cold. He dreamed of dragons whose flame might be the only defense against that chill. Yet, each morning, the illusions of night fled under the warmth of the rising sun. Reality demanded that he focus on the realm's immediate challenges, not phantoms. So he set the dreams aside, trusting that if the realm were united and strong, it could meet any threat, no matter how dire. He believed that forging alliances among all the kingdoms was a sure path to survival, should a cataclysm ever descend from beyond the wall. His children grew vibrant and bright. Rhaenys took after her mother in many ways, quick-witted and graceful, with a fierce Dornish spark. Aegon was more reserved, perhaps echoing some of Rhaegar's own introspective nature. They learned at the feet of the greatest maesters, they practiced the sword under the watchful eye of the Kingsguard, and they accompanied their father on royal tours, seeing firsthand the broad tapestry of the Seven Kingdoms. The small folk adored them, showering them with flowers and cheers wherever they traveled. Rhaegar, mindful of how carefully illusions could shatter, made sure his children saw both the suffering and the joy in the realm, so they would grow into rulers with hearts that understood both the burdens and blessings of kingship. As the 6th year of his reign approached, ambassadors from Dorne, the Westerlands, the North, and the Iron Islands all gathered in King's Landing for a grand feast, meant to further affirm the alliances. The city was alight with color and music. Dancers filled the streets. Scented oils and incense wafted through the air. Rhaegar used the occasion to announce a further reduction of certain war taxes that his father had imposed long ago. He also proposed an expanded system of roads that would connect every major region to King's Landing. It was met with applause from most, and quiet acceptance from others. In the swirl of festivities, one could almost believe that the Seven Kingdoms had reached a point of lasting harmony. Yet an undercurrent of tension still remained. Those who thrived on conflict whispered of how vulnerable the realm might be without a stern fist on the throne. Some lords fretted that Rhaegar's gentler approach could embolden external foes. The Ironborn, while less aggressive than in times past, still chafed under a united kingdom's constraints. There were always corners of darkness, slavers lurking in lists, pirate kings prowling the stepstones, petty bandits scattered across the forests. But the realm's watchfulness had grown keener. The royal fleet patrolled the seas with vigilant discipline, and local lords, with improved roads and resources, found it easier to maintain order. One evening, after the feasting had died down, Rhaegar strolled along the battlements of the Red Keep, much as he had done in years past when he as only a prince with a harp. Looking out over the city, he saw thousands of lanterns twinkling in the streets below, a reflection of the star-studded sky above. Kingship had turned out to be a heavier burden than he ever imagined, yet also strangely fulfilling. To see men, women, and children laughing and celebrating in peace, knowing that the realm was no longer a tinderbox waiting for a spark, gave him a sense of quiet accomplishment. Arthur Dayne approached him, silent as a cat in his white cloak. They stood side by side, two old friends who had known each other's hopes and secrets. "You've done much good for the realm," Arthur said softly, as if reading Rhaegar's thoughts. "You should be proud." Rhaegar closed his eyes, letting the night air caress his face. "I am proud," he admitted. "And yet, I wonder if I've only postponed some inevitable reckoning. The songs speak of threats from the north, dragons that must be born in fire and blood." Arthur offered a sympathetic smile. "If darkness comes, we shall face it together. The realm is united, stronger than it has been in generations. You have not neglected the sword entirely, you have merely tempered it with wisdom." Rhaegar's heart felt lighter at those words. They stood for a time in companionable silence. Below them, the city glowed with promise, and above them, the sky seemed boundless. For one sweet moment, Rhaegar allowed himself to simply be content with the peace he had wrought. That peace, in the end, would define the next decades of his reign. Future conflicts arose, for no realm is free of turmoil forever. There were skirmishes with the Ironborn, tensions with the free cities, and even internal unrest when a famine struck parts of the Riverlands. But each trial was faced with unity and decisive leadership. The memory of Aerys II's madness lingered in the kingdom's consciousness, reminding everyone, highborn and small folk alike, what they had escaped. Rather than descend into paralyzing fear, they rallied behind King Rhaegar, trusting that he would guide them through adversity without the horrors of war. Over time, the Targaryen name was redeemed in the eyes of many. Songs were composed about the transformation of a dynasty once steeped in fear into one of benevolent stewardship. Historians wrote that King Rhaegar I had accomplished a feat greater than any conquest. He had conquered the hearts of his people, forging bonds of loyalty through compassion, justice, and steadfast resolve. In the twilight of his life, with silver strands of hair turning white, Rhaegar would take comfort in the presence of his grown children and grandchildren. They would gather around him, begging to hear stories of how he once believed in ancient prophecies, how he had played his harp at Harrenhal, how he had ascended the throne in a time so fraught with peril yet managed to avert the tidal wave of bloodshed that seemed all but certain. He would lean back in his chair, a wistful smile on his lips, reflecting on the countless crossroads where he might have chosen violence over negotiation, vengeance over compassion. In that quiet reflection, he might say to them, "Power is not in fire and blood alone. It is in the gentle, steady hand that holds the realm together, that sees every subject not as a pawn but as a life worth protecting. True power is in unity, in listening to the whispers of the weak as well as the commands of the mighty." And the children, with eyes wide, would marvel that such a time of madness could have existed, that a king so loved had emerged from the looming shadow of fear. They would see the crown resting on a nearby cushion, the old Valyrian steel circlet set with rubies, and they would understand that the greatest challenge a king could face was not an invading army, but the demons of the mind and the temptations of absolute authority. They would know that only a heart tempered by empathy, guided by wisdom, could rule the seven kingdoms without bringing them to ruin. And so Rhaegar Targaryen's legacy would echo through the halls of history, the dragon who won the Iron Throne not through war, but through the mightier weapons of understanding and peace. His name would endure in ballads sung by future generations, a testament to the possibility that even in a land shaped by centuries of blood and fire, a single soul, guided by love, tempered by sorrow, and driven by an unbreakable resolve, could show the realm another path. In the end, his quiet victory would outshine any roar of battle, and his reign would stand as proof that the fate of a kingdom need not be written in flame and sword, but in the delicate, unbreakable threads of hope. In the 7th year of King Rhaegar's reign, a hush settled on King's Landing once more. Though the realm had tasted peace for a span of years long enough to make such calm feel almost ordinary, there remained a pervasive sense among courtiers and small folk alike that something was shifting in the air. Perhaps it was the inevitable turning of life's wheel, children growing older, alliances needing renewal, new threats stirring in dark corners. Yet no one could pinpoint precisely what it was, only that time did not stand still, and peace, however blessed, would forever be a fragile tapestry. King Rhaegar himself felt this subtly gathering tension. One crisp morning, standing before a window of the Red Keep that overlooked the Blackwater Rush, he breathed deeply of the city's air, tinted with the pungent smells of fish and spice and dust. In the distance, he could see gulls wheeling over the harbor, the sails of trading cogs and skiffs bobbing in the sunlight. Much had changed since the early days of his regency. Where once King's Landing had been choked with wariness and gloom, it now bustled with commerce and liveliness. Though the city's labyrinthine alleys still hid pockets of hunger and crime, and though the wealthy and the poor stood worlds apart, there was not the same abiding dread of violence that had once haunted every shadow. Rhaegar took some comfort in that. He turned from the window and let his eyes roam the half-lit council chamber, where a new tapestry had been hung, an intricate weaving of Targaryen dragons coiling around the seven-pointed star, symbolizing a realm that married old Valyrian heritage with the faith of the Seven. He had commissioned it to remind everyone who entered that they served not only a single house, but a united kingdom. Even so, Rhaegar felt the weight of the crown pressing upon him. Every morning it seemed heavier, although he wore it with outward composure. He walked over to the small table where quills, ink, and parchments lay arrayed for the day's business. Each scroll carried matters for his judgment: proposals for water allocation in the Riverlands, a thorny inheritance dispute in the Vale, renewed requests from the Iron Islands for greater autonomy. They were not the stuff of epic songs, these detailed negotiations and daily tasks, yet they formed the scaffolding of a reign that sought to avoid the sword whenever possible. Jon Connington arrived first, his red hair now streaked with strands of silver that spoke to the passing years. He carried a ledger under one arm, the look on his face one of ready determination. Over the years, he had proven to be a meticulous master of coin, wringing out inefficiencies in the realm's finances and using them to fund infrastructure, education, and other projects dear to the king's heart. He gave Rhaegar a respectful bow, something he performed more out of friendship than mere protocol. "Your Grace," he said, "we should speak of that matter we discussed last eve, the negotiations for additional loans from the Iron Bank. They have offered favorable terms but require further securities. Shall I call for the scribes?" "Not yet," Rhaegar murmured, resting one hand lightly on the table. "I wish to proceed cautiously. The roads have already taxed our coffers and borrowed gold enough. I would see our debt to Bravos lessened before taking on more." Connington looked mildly distressed at that. "And yet the expansions you envision, new harbors, better fleets, will require gold that we do not have readily in the treasury. Our revenues are higher than ever, but the improvements you champion are also more ambitious." Rhaegar inclined his head. "I know. Let me think on it a little longer. I have an audience with the Bravosi envoy in a fortnight. We'll see if we can structure a more measured agreement." He offered a slight smile. "I have no desire for the realm to become so beholden to the Iron Bank that we risk losing our sovereignty." Connington nodded, understanding well the tightrope walk of forging a prosperous realm without sacrificing its independence. He placed the ledger on the table and began marking notations, preparing for the day's council meeting. In time, the other members of Rhaegar's small council arrived, one by one. Varys, the master of whisperers, ever discreet, ever smooth, appeared as if from the shadows, a faint smile on his powdered face. He had served King Aerys and now served King Rhaegar with a loyalty that, while often inscrutable, had at least proven consistent through these years. Ser Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, entered in his pristine white cloak, acknowledging all with a solemn nod. Lord Mace Tyrell was also present that day, though not officially a council member. He had come to petition for certain expansions in the Reach, hoping to secure the king's patronage for a canal project that would link distant tributaries to the Mander. They settled around the table and the day's business commenced. It was mundane, in a sense: trade tariffs, land allocations, a new proposal for a series of watchtowers along the Dornish marches to better protect caravans. Yet the swirl of discussion, the interplay of alliances, all underlined the tapestry Rhaegar had labored to weave, a realm where men strove to solve their differences with pen and voice, not sword and flame. That in itself was remarkable after the tumult that had preceded his ascent. The conversation eventually turned to Dorne. With Elia Martell gone these past years, the emotional bond that had once so firmly tethered Dorne to the throne now rested heavily on Rhaenys and Aegon, who carried half Dornish blood in their veins. Lord Doran Martell remained an ally, but tensions still arose from time to time. The Dornish were a proud people, not prone to forgetting past slights. With Rhaenys and Aegon both nearing adulthood, questions of betrothals loomed. Rhaenys, at 16, had grown into a poised young woman, spirited and shrewd. Aegon, now 14, showed the beginnings of a thoughtful, methodical nature, always seeming to weigh possibilities before acting. Varys leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. "Your Grace, there has been rumor in the water gardens of Dorne that Prince Doran might seek a match for one of his own children in the higher echelons of the realm. Prince Trystane, his youngest, is far too young for Princess Rhaenys, of course, but there might be an interest in forging a betrothal that cements the relationship anew." Rhaegar listened quietly. He knew Doran's children to some degree. The one of suitable age was actually Prince Quentyn, though still younger than Rhaenys by a small margin. Then there was Prince Oberyn's brood, the Sand Snakes, but they bore the stigma of bastardy. "I am not opposed to the notion," Rhaegar replied. "But Rhaenys will have a voice in this, as shall Aegon, for I would not force a match on them. They must be amenable, and I value Doran's counsel above all. Let me speak with Rhaenys soon, and we'll see if the Dornish preference might align." Tyrell cleared his throat. "Your Grace, might I suggest that Princess Rhaenys be matched with a second son of the Reach? We have some fine candidates who might deepen the ties between Highgarden and the crown. If I may be so bold." He paused, his fleshy hands folded before him. "The Tyrell line is stable, of course, but many of our vassals have promising scions." Rhaegar arched an eyebrow. "I appreciate the offer, Lord Tyrell, but as I said, we must weigh many factors. And Rhaenys herself deserves a say." He kept his tone gentle but firm. He had learned long ago that Mace Tyrell was easily flattered but could be overbearing when it came to forging alliances that would favor his house. "For now, let us set aside talk of betrothals. We have more pressing matters." So the council continued, each subject weighed and debated. By the time the sun stood at its zenith, they adjourned. Rhaegar took a small lunch in his solar, bread, olives, a bit of roast fowl, while reading missives from the Westerlands. Tywin Lannister, though never having returned to serve in an official capacity, remained a pillar of power. Casterly Rock was quiet these days. Tyrion Lannister, the youngest son, had proven surprisingly adept at managing certain of the Rock's affairs, though his father seldom praised him openly. Jaime Lannister, formerly a Kingsguard in another life, had, in this timeline, never taken the White Cloak. He remained the heir to Casterly Rock, traveling occasionally to King's Landing but never settling there. Rhaegar maintained polite relations with Tywin and had no desire to provoke the proud lion. In the afternoon, Rhaegar granted audiences. A minor lord from the Stormlands approached with an inheritance issue. A steward from the Vale presented a token gift on behalf of Lady Anya Waynwood. A fisherman's guild from Crackclaw Point petitioned for royal assistance against smugglers. Rhaegar listened carefully to each, ensuring they felt heard. He knew that monarchs who ignored small concerns soon found themselves grappling with larger rebellions. If the realm was to be truly knitted together, it would be through 1,000 moments of empathy as much as any grand decree. As evening's shadows stretched across the city, Rhaegar made his way to the royal apartments. These chambers, once filled with the hush of sorrow after Elaya's passing, now had a new kind of warmth. Aegon, spindly and solemn-faced, was hunched over a table strewn with parchments, lost in a book on the history of old Valyria. His silver hair gleamed beneath the lamplight, and he barely noticed his father's entrance until Rhaegar gently rapped a knuckle on the table. Lost in the past again? Rhaegar teased quietly, seating himself beside Aegon. Careful that you do not forget the present. Aegon smiled, albeit a bit sheepishly. I'm reading about the dragon lords of ancient days. How they governed, how they used their magic to shape the world around them. He hesitated. I see so many parallels with what House Targaryen might have been. But we're not that people anymore, are we? Rhaegar exhaled, his eyes roaming over the swirling lines of Valyrian script on the page. We carry the blood, he said. But that empire died long ago. If we are wise, we take the lessons of Valyria's fall to heart. Hubris consumed them, just as it nearly consumed our own line. Perhaps there is another path, one that does not require binding ourselves to ancient illusions. Aegon nodded, though a flicker of disappointment crossed his face. I sometimes wonder what it would be like if dragons still soared the skies. Would we be safer? Or more tyrannical? Both, perhaps. Rhaegar touched his son's shoulder. Never forget that power itself is neither pure safety nor pure danger. It is how we wield it that matters. Aegon closed the book. He looked at his father, seeming on the cusp of another question. Sometimes I dream, father. I see a great darkness creeping in from the edges of the realm, something cold and lifeless, rolling over fields and snuffing out torches like breath on a candle. I wake and it's gone, and I tell myself it's just a nightmare. But it feels real. Rhaegar felt a tremor, the old memory of half-forgotten prophecies stirring in his mind. He recalled his own dream visions from years past. He pressed his lips together, searching for the right words. I have dreamed such things too. The night is dark and full of terrors, the priests of the Red God say. The old stories about the long night might contain a kernel of truth. But so long as we remain watchful and united, I believe we can face anything, even that which lurks beyond the wall. Aegon glanced down, nodding slowly. United, he echoed, as if tasting the word. After a pause, he carefully set his book aside. Rhaenys was looking for you earlier. She said she'd be practicing with Ser Arthur in the courtyard. Rhaegar smiled. Ah, yes. I'd best not keep her waiting. She'll think I've forgotten. He rose, ruffling his son's hair fondly before striding out. Down in the Red Keep's practice yard, Rhaenys was indeed sparring with Ser Arthur Dane, her lithe figure clad in light leathers, her black hair, with glimmers of her mother's Dornish darkness, braided back from her face. A wooden sword whistled through the air as she lunged, displaying remarkable grace. Ser Arthur, wearing practice armor, parried her blows and offered quick pointers. Occasionally, he tapped her on the shoulder or the leg to show where she left herself open. You need to keep your balance, he advised calmly, deflecting one of her thrusts. Remember, in a real fight, a single misstep can be the difference between victory and a blade through your ribs. Rhaegar watched from a short distance, his face touched with paternal pride. Rhaenys had insisted on training with the sword, a reflection of both her Dornish heritage and her own fiery spirit. He had allowed it, believing all members of the royal family should learn self-defense, though tradition in some realms frowned upon a princess wielding steel. Tradition, he thought, has been the death of too many dreams. She caught sight of him, lowered her sword, and dashed over. Father, she said, her cheeks flushed from exertion. You said we'd ride together today, remember? Indeed I did. Rhaegar offered a warm grin. If you're not too tired from whacking Sir Arthur. She laughed. He's still whacking me more than I whack him, but I'm improving. Casting Sir Arthur a nod of respect, she looked back to Rhaegar. I'll change and then we can be off. By the time father and daughter mounted their horses near the main gate of the Red Keep, dusk's gold and rose tapestry had begun spreading across the sky. They set off through the city accompanied by a small guard of knights. The crowds parted respectfully, yet not with the cringing fear that had once plagued these streets under King Aerys. Instead, people murmured greetings, your grace, princess, and other salutations. Small children paused in their games to stare wide-eyed at the Targaryen royals passing by. Some even waved timidly. Rhaenys returned the gestures with easy smiles while Rhaegar nodded, acknowledging their well wishes. Their ride took them along the winding roads toward the fields outside the city where the air was less thick with the odor of tanneries and middens. They passed farmland that belonged to local stewards, saw clusters of peasants finishing the day's work, gleaning grain or tending flocks of geese. A few spirited hounds ran along the road, barking at the procession before darting away. When they were some distance from the busy outskirts, Rhaenys slowed her mare, letting the guards lag a bit behind to grant them some measure of privacy. Rhaegar took note. She clearly wished to speak of something. He guided his silver-white stallion beside her. Father, she began softly, I want to talk about my future. She glanced at him, her dark eyes shining. I know the council is pressuring you about my betrothal. And I know you want me to have a.s. I want that too. Rhaegar nodded, guiding his horse to match her pace. Yes. I've told them you must have a voice. Has someone been pestering you? Rhaenys shrugged. Not directly. But I hear the whispers. Lord Tyrell, Lord Arryn, some of the lesser lords, they all wonder if I'll be married to one of their sons, forging alliances. Uncle Doran in Dorne might even wish a match with Prince Quentyn, for all I know. She paused, inhaling the clean evening air. I understand that's how things are done. We're royalty. Our marriages are not just personal matters but matters of state. Still, I want to be certain. I don't want a life lived in regret. He reached out and placed a hand over hers, briefly. No father wishes to bind his daughter to a life of misery for the sake of diplomacy. Yet we cannot ignore that alliances are crucial. If there's someone you feel you could respect, perhaps even come to love. I know, she said, giving him a small, lopsided grin. I'm not a foolish child, father. Nor do I dream of some perfect romance from a ballad. But I do care about the realm. If my marriage can strengthen the unity you've spent years building, so be it. I only ask that you let me meet my suitors to talk to them on my own terms so I can make an informed choice. Rhaegar smiled. You speak like a queen already, Rhaenys. Very well, I promise that no betrothal contract will be signed until you have met the candidate or candidates and expressed your willingness to proceed. She breathed out a visible sigh of relief. Thank you. Then she brightened. And Aegon? Are you likewise searching for a bride for him? Rhaegar chuckled softly. One challenge at a time. He's still quite young, though not so young that the council won't begin their meddling. I suspect they're eyeing various noble daughters. Some from the Vale, some from the north, some from the Reach. Everyone wants a link to the royal line. They continued their ride, following a trail that wound around a small rise. The city's walls stood behind them, tinted by the dying light. The conversation turned to lighter topics, Rhaenys' recent training, the rumors of a grand tournament being planned in Riverrun, the harvest festival to be held in King's Landing. But beneath the surface, Rhaegar knew that the question of alliances and marriages was more than just rumor. It was how dynasties preserved themselves. Peaceful though his reign was, the traditions of Westeros demanded that the royal line secure itself through carefully chosen bonds. He could only hope to guide those choices with kindness and wisdom, letting his children live their own lives rather than becoming pawns. When they returned to the Red Keep, the stars had come out in gentle clusters and the air had grown cool. Rhaenys parted ways with him in the courtyard, promising to come to dinner after she had freshened up. Rhaegar lingered for a moment. Let ends directive. Meanwhile, lesser lords like the Farmans of Fair Isle prepared their own defenses, having historically borne the brunt of Ironborn raids. For a fortnight, tension hung like a thundercloud. The Ironborn mustered in their island strongholds. The royal fleet maintained watch, establishing picket lines that no longship could slip past undetected. The realm waited, hearts pounding. Would Balon challenge the crown directly, or would he concede? Envoys exchanged final threats. Balon raged that Rhaegar was strangling his people, denying them the right to reap the spoils of the sea. The crown insisted that no such right existed to plunder loyal subjects. It was a standoff that threatened to ignite into war at any moment. In the midst of this, Rhaenys was still traveling in Dorne. She wrote anxious letters to her father, asking if the rumors of imminent battle were true. Rhaegar wrote back, assuring her that while conflict loomed, the crown would do everything possible to avert bloodshed. But behind his calm words, he felt a gnawing dread. He had worked so tirelessly to shape a reign of peace, yet here he stood on the edge of violent confrontation. Perhaps it was inevitable that someone would test the realm's resolve. History told him that no kingdom, however benevolent, remained free of challenge. Then, a raven arrived from the Iron Islands bearing news. The Iron Fleet had moved under the cover of a storm, attempting to skirt the royal blockade to the north. At least a dozen of their longships had been sighted near the Sunset Sea, heading for the Westerlands. Admiral Redwine mobilized swiftly to intercept, engaging them in a running battle amidst choppy waters. The dispatch told of savage fighting, longships ramming smaller crown vessels, men leaping from deck to deck with axes and swords. The royal fleet's discipline held, however, and by the end of the day, most of the Ironborn ships were either sunk or captured. A handful escaped, battered, fleeing back toward Pike. The crown's losses were not light either. Half a dozen war galleys had gone down, and many good men perished. The significance was clear. Balon had tested the realm, and the realm had answered with steel and flame. News of the battle spread quickly, and the lords of Westeros murmured that war was indeed at hand. Rhaegar immediately dispatched a message to Balon, warning that any further aggression would lead to a full-scale invasion of the Iron Islands. He also appealed to the lords of the Iron Islands themselves, urging them to depose Balon peacefully if they did not wish to see the might of the realm descend upon them. It was a gamble. If any lesser Ironborn lord sought to unseat Balon, a civil war might erupt among them. But perhaps that was preferable to a drawn-out conflict with the entire crown. For days there was no word. The blockade tightened. The Lannisters kept their coasts on high alert. Rhaegar wondered if he should call more banners from the Reach or the Stormlands, but he held off, hoping to avoid escalation. Then, at last, a raven arrived. Balon Greyjoy's tone was darkly defiant, but he proposed terms. He would allow the royal fleet to continue its patrol without interference if the crown recognized the Iron Islands' claim to raiding rights on the seas beyond the Westerosi coastline. It was, in essence, a face-saving measure. He was backing down from direct attacks on Westeros, but demanded the illusion of preserving the old way in some form. Rhaegar and his council debated fiercely. Connington and Hightower urged a refusal, wanting unconditional surrender from Balon. Others, like Varys, suggested there might be room for a carefully worded agreement that let the Ironborn prey on foreign shipping, a practice that might invite trouble from Essosi powers but would keep Westerosi shores safe. In the end, Rhaegar decided on a partial concession. The crown would not condone piracy, but it would not enforce any punishments if the Ironborn raided ships beyond Westerosi jurisdiction. Any vessel sailing under a Westerosi banner or trading with the crown was off-limits. It was an uneasy compromise, one that might invite future problems, but it defused the immediate crisis. Balon accepted, claiming victory for the old way, though it was clear to most observers that he had merely backed down after testing a stronger realm. Relief washed across Westeros when the blockade ended and the Iron Fleet withdrew. The realm had averted a broader war. Rhaegar, though victorious, felt no triumph in it. He had lost good men at sea, and the peace he cherished had been stained with blood. But in the eyes of the realm, it proved the crown could defend its people. Lords who had doubted Rhaegar's resolve now recognized that while the king might prefer music over swords, he was no weakling. In the end, even a gentle dragon could bare its fangs when threatened. Winter's chill deepened, hinting that the cold season might be long. The roads leading north were soon clogged with snowdrifts, and the White Raven from the Citadel announced that an official winter had fallen upon the realm. Harvests slowed, supply caravans braved the cold as best they could. Rhaegar monitored the stockpiles carefully, recalling the famine scares of previous years. He directed the distribution of royal grain to areas stricken by early frosts, ensuring no region slipped into starvation. The newly improved roads helped, though they too were sometimes impassable during blizzards. As the weeks turned into months, word came from Dorne that Rhaenys had arrived safely and was enjoying Prince Doran's hospitality at the Water Gardens. She wrote letters filled with descriptions of the lush gardens, the bright mosaic tiles, the sunlight dancing on fountains, such a contrast to the biting cold gripping King's Landing. She hinted that Prince Quentyn was sweet but shy. She also mentioned spending hours talking with Oberyn Martell, who regaled her with stories of Elaya's youth and his own adventures in Essos. Oberyn had apparently taken a liking to his niece, offering to show her how to use a spear Dornish style, though Rhaenys laughed that Ser Arthur looked ready to faint at the suggestion. Now and then she alluded to other Dornish suitors but did not name anyone she favored. One day an unexpected visitor arrived at court, Tyrion Lannister. Rhaegar had met him only a few times fleetingly but knew of his reputed cleverness. Tyrion came on behalf of Lord Tywin, bearing carefully worded letters about certain trade arrangements with the crown. Rhaegar welcomed him politely in the throne room, though he no longer sat the Iron Throne for every audience, preferring to stand or sit in a simpler chair. Tyrion's gaze flicked upward at the menacing blades of the throne as he approached. "Your Grace," Tyrion said with a flourish, "it is an honor. My father sends his regards, though not his presence, I'm afraid." Rhaegar smiled mildly. "Lord Tywin's presence is not often bestowed without reason. He knows I respect him, even if we do not always see eye to eye. How fares Casterly Rock this winter?" Tyrion's mismatched eyes glittered. "Well enough, thanks to the gold in its veins. The cold does not trouble us overly much. My father is concerned about raiding on the western coasts, but it seems you've managed to keep the Ironborn leashed." Rhaegar nodded. "They're leashed only so far as they want to be. But yes, the threat has receded for now. Please extend my thanks to Lord Tywin for his cooperation during the blockade. It helped to present a united front." Tyrion bowed. "He will be pleased to hear it. Now, if we may retire to a quieter chamber, I have some proposals regarding trade tariffs and shipping routes that might benefit both the Crown and the Westerlands." Rhaegar led Tyrion to a side solar where they talked for hours. Tyrion presented a cunning plan to lower certain tariffs for Lannister-controlled ships in exchange for them committing to carry Crown-approved goods. It was a delicate negotiation, but Rhaegar recognized that there was mutual benefit. The Crown would see increased trade volume and the Lannisters would profit from reduced fees. By the time they concluded, Rhaegar agreed to a trial period of lower tariffs subject to certain conditions. Tyrion seemed genuinely pleased. Before leaving, he indulged in a goblet of wine and asked about Rhaenys, curious whether she might one day wed a Westerlander. The question gave Rhaegar pause. "We've considered many possibilities, Lord Tyrion. She's in Dorne now, exploring her mother's heritage. I would not rule out a match in the Westerlands, but it would depend on the suitor and on her own will." Tyrion smiled. "Fair enough, Your Grace. As a father, I'm sure you want the best for her. And as a prospective alliance, the West offers much. But I know better than to press the matter." He drained his cup. "I thank you for your time. My father will hear of your magnanimity, though I cannot promise he'll express anything so obvious as gratitude." Rhaegar allowed himself a wry chuckle. "I expect nothing less from Lord Tywin." So Tyrion departed, leaving behind a favorable impression on Rhaegar, who appreciated the younger man's frank intelligence. The arrangement they had brokered helped keep the realm's commercial arteries open throughout the winter, ensuring that neither region languished in want. The seeds of trust between the Crown and Casterly Rock were thereby nurtured anew. Winter pressed on. Rhaegar's letters to the Night's Watch eventually bore fruit. A reply arrived from Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, who acknowledged that there were odd sightings beyond the wall, whispers of tribes of wildlings fleeing something deeper in the frozen wastes. Mormont admitted he lacked solid evidence of any supernatural threat, but the uneasy stories continued. He wrote that the Watch was at its lowest numbers in generations, reliant on occasional recruits from the Northern Lords, but that if truly dire times approached, they would need the realm's support. The king folded this letter and placed it in a private coffer, pondering. He wondered if the realm would even believe in the White Walkers if they did return. Tales of the Long Night had faded into myth. The notion of an ancient threat stirring in the north might be dismissed as fireside fables. Yet Rhaegar could not wholly ignore the stirring in his bones whenever he thought of those old prophecies. He resolved to do what he could, sending more supplies to Castle Black, encouraging the lords of the north to bolster the Watch with fresh men. Officially, he declared it a measure against wildling raids. Unofficially, he suspected the realm might one day need a more formidable defense. Meanwhile, Rhaenys wrote of her continuing sojourn in Dorne. She had visited Sunspear, tasted the spicy dishes of the Dornish kitchens, even walked the scorching sands at midday. She described Quentyn as earnest but lacking a certain spark that she craved in a partner. Another suitor, a Dane cousin from High Hermitage, had impressed her more, but she remained unready to commit. In each missive she spoke of her mother, Elia, as if uncovering pieces of a heritage she had never fully known. Rhaegar felt a pang of wistfulness reading these letters, recalling Elia's gentle eyes. He was glad Rhaenys was discovering that lost part of herself. By the time the 8th year of Rhaegar's reign unfolded, winter still clutched the land, though rumors suggested the worst of it might pass soon enough. The crown's careful management of resources prevented starvation in most regions, though some pockets of the Vale and the north struggled. Rhaegar continued to dispatch relief where needed, working with local lords to ensure fair distribution. Little by little, the realm's confidence in its king deepened. Here was a Targaryen who did not let his people freeze or starve. The memory of the Mad King's neglect began to recede further into the pages of history. Yet one day an urgent raven arrived from the Vale. An avalanche had swept away a mountain pass near the Eyrie, isolating several small villages, and the region was in dire need of rescue. With roads impassable, the villagers faced famine and exposure. Rhaegar at once called upon the lords of the Vale to coordinate a relief effort. Lord Yohn Royce, now an older but still robust warrior, led a team of knights and laborers to clear a path and bring supplies. Rhaegar, not content to merely issue orders, decided to travel part of the way himself to oversee the operation and show solidarity. He had done so in the past, visiting troubled corners of the realm personally whenever feasible. His decision caused a stir at court. The king, traveling in the dead of winter toward the mountainous Vale, was not without risk. But Rhaegar believed that a king's presence could galvanize the local lords, ensuring swift action. And so, accompanied by Sir Arthur Dayne, Jon Connington, and a retinue of knights, he set out from King's Landing on a crisp morning. Snow flurries danced in the cold wind as they rode north along the King's Road. The journey was challenging, the cold biting at their faces. They stopped at inns or friendly holdfasts each night, ensuring that the king did not freeze on the open road. When at last they reached the outskirts of the Vale, the towering peaks loomed overhead, jagged and ice-crusted. Rhaegar and his men met up with Lord Royce's party at a small hamlet where families had taken shelter in cramped cottages. The king spoke with the local folk, distributing bread and furs, taking note of their needs. He ordered more supplies from the royal wagons to be handed out, ensuring that none were left shivering and hungry. Then they pressed on toward the site of the avalanche. The once sturdy road had been obliterated by tons of ice and rock. Trees lay uprooted, forming a tangled barrier. Rhaegar surveyed the devastation with grim eyes. Workers were hacking at the ice, laboring to clear a pass, but progress was slow. If we fail to open this route, Lord Royce explained, the villages beyond will starve. Their stores are nearly gone. Rhaegar saw that the men working in the cold were near exhaustion. We must rotate them more frequently, he said. Build a temporary camp here, with tents and fires. Let them work in shifts and feed them hot meals in between. Connington, allocate resources. If you need more supplies, send riders back to the nearest large settlement. I will stay here until we break through. So the king himself stood among the freezing laborers, offering them encouraging words, helping pass out heated wine and fresh gloves. The presence of the silver-haired monarch in the midst of wintry ruin lifted spirits. Men who would have quit found new determination. Day by day, the pass was carved open. Rhaegar never wielded a shovel himself in any ostentatious display. He knew such efforts might be more hindrance than help, but he made certain that none felt forgotten. Even the local lords pitched in, spurred by the king's example. After over a week of hard labor, the path was clear enough for small wagons to get through. A triumphant shout went up among the workers. Rhaegar and Lord Royce led a relief convoy into the isolated villages. The gratitude of the people was palpable. Children cheered at the sight of the king, who brought them sacks of grain and dried fruit. Elders wept, praising the Seven for sending a monarch who cared. All of this touched Rhaegar deeply. He thought of how easily, in another time, a king might have ignored their plight, leaving them to die. He vowed never to forget these moments, nor the price of negligence. When the crisis was resolved, Rhaegar lingered in the Vale a while longer, accepting Lord Nestor Royce's hospitality at the Gates of the Moon. They dined in a grand hall warmed by braziers, a stark contrast to the frigid peaks outside. Rhaegar used the opportunity to discuss Vale politics, how the regent of the Eyrie was managing while the young Lord Arryn came of age, and how the Vale might further integrate into the realm's trade networks. He also listened to local complaints about mountain clans who were rumored to be more active during winter, raiding lonely hamlets. Rhaegar promised to reinforce the local garrisons, ensuring that no house faced such threats alone. Finally, satisfied that matters in the Vale were well in hand, Rhaegar prepared to return to King's Landing. He parted with Lord Royce on amicable terms, the Vale's bannermen offering prayers for the king's safe journey. As Rhaegar's party set out, the air felt a fraction warmer, hinting that spring might not be too far off. He allowed himself a small measure of hope. With the avalanche crisis resolved and the Ironborn threat in check, perhaps the realm could settle into a more stable rhythm again. Yet fate seldom allowed such tranquility to linger. On the third day of travel south, as the party wound through a wooded section of the King's Road, a group of armed riders emerged from the tree line. They wore no sigils, their cloaks a ragged assortment of grays and browns. At first, Rhaegar's knights thought them simple brigands. But they rode with more discipline than mere outlaws. Their leader, a tall man with a patchy beard, hailed the king's escort in a gravelly voice, demanding their valuables. Ser Arthur Dayne urged the king to ride behind the main column while the knights formed a protective ring. The king's banner flapped overhead, but these riders did not flinch. They advanced with swords drawn. "Cut them down," snarled the leader. "Seize the baggage. Kill whoever resists." A sharp, brutal skirmish erupted. Rhaegar, though a capable fighter, tried to avoid bloodshed. He called out, "Do you know who we are? I am King Rhaegar Targaryen. Lay down your weapons and you shall have a fair trial." Laughter came from the bandits. They clearly cared not for the king's identity or believed this was an idle boast. Steel clashed as Ser Arthur Dayne and the knights engaged. For a moment, Rhaegar glimpsed the swirl of conflict, shouting men, horses rearing, swords flashing. Dayne's white cloak fluttered as he expertly knocked a rider from his saddle. Jon Connington led another charge, while Rhaegar found himself wheeling his horse around to fend off two attackers. The first was a scar-faced man brandishing an axe. Rhaegar deflected the blow with vigilance, feeling the shock run up his arm. The second lunged with a spear, which Rhaegar narrowly avoided by twisting in the saddle. Despite his reluctance, Rhaegar realized these men meant to kill them all. He had no choice but to fight in earnest. Vigilance sliced through the air, parrying and returning strikes. The clang of metal echoed in the frosty morning. Eventually, the king's escort gained the upper hand, for they were well-trained knights facing a band of half-starved ruffians, however disciplined. The bandits realized too late they had charged a formidable foe. Some tried to flee. Others were cut down. The path was soon littered with bodies. Rhaegar, breathing hard, reined in his horse, scanning the carnage with sorrow. Blood spattered the snow, an ugly reminder of how violence could erupt even in a realm striving for peace. When all was done, they took a handful of wounded bandits prisoner. Under interrogation, these men claimed they had deserted from a Sellsword company in the disputed lands of Essos and come to Westeros seeking easy plunder. They had heard rumors of wealth traveling the King's Road, never imagining they might run straight into the king himself. Rhaegar ordered that the dead be buried and the prisoners taken to the nearest holdfast for trial under local law. He could have pronounced judgment on the spot, but he deemed it more just to let the local lords handle matters, ensuring the bandits did not hang without a semblance of due process. Still, it grated on his soul. Another handful of wasted lives, another sprinkling of blood on winter's snow. Thus they continued south, a touch more warily. Rhaegar felt a pang of guilt. He had always wanted to believe that if the realm were governed well, such lawlessness would be minimal. But the world was wide, the sea of desperate men endless. That night, he asked Ser Arthur if the guard had suffered any fatalities. Dayne reported 3 men killed, 4 wounded. A heavy price for traveling one road in a kingdom supposedly at peace. Rhaegar prayed for their families, resolved to see them compensated. At last, they neared King's Landing. From a distance, they could see the familiar skyline of spires and walls, touched by the faint thaw of approaching spring. Rhaegar felt relief, eager to return to the relative safety of the Red Keep. Yet as they passed through the city gates, the king sensed an undercurrent of excitement in the crowds, a hush of anticipation. People on the street craned their necks, casting glances at the returning party. Murmurs spread in the throng. Rhaegar heard fragments of rumor. Princess Rhaenys has returned. She's brought a suitor. The king must see them at once. Intrigued, Rhaegar led his knights to the castle, his heart beating a little faster. In the Red Keep's courtyard, Rhaenys stood waiting, clad in a flowing Dornish gown of deep red, a sans-silk scarf draped over her shoulders. She looked radiant, her dark hair shining. Beside her stood a young man, also attired in Dornish fashion, tall, with sun-kissed skin, the sigil of House Martell embroidered on his doublet. Quentyn Martell, Rhaegar realized, though the lad had grown from the shy boy he recalled. He seemed earnest, respectful, bowing immediately when Rhaegar dismounted. "Father," Rhaenys said, her voice brimming with excitement. "I've come from Dorne as promised. Prince Doran sends his love. And I have made a choice, if you will hear it." Rhaegar's gaze flicked between her and Quentyn. "I am always ready to hear your words, my dearest." She took a breath, cheeks flushed. "I have spoken at length with Quentyn. We traveled together, we shared discussions of how we might strengthen the bond between the crown and Dorne. He is kind and thoughtful. He does not boast or preen. Perhaps he lacks Oberyn's flair, she added with a teasing grin, but that suits me fine. We wish to wed if you and Prince Doran consent. Rhaegar felt a flicker of surprise. He had not expected her to choose Quentyn. Rumors had suggested she found him rather dull. Yet looking at them now, he saw a quiet understanding in their eyes, a mutual respect that might deepen into genuine affection. He recalled the realm's history. The Targaryens and the Martells were once sworn foes, then uneasy allies. This match might help ensure Dorne's loyalty for another generation. And, most importantly, it was Rhaenys' own will. Slowly, the king smiled. If your hearts are in accord, and Prince Doran is willing, I shall give my blessing. Then he turned to Quentyn. Are you prepared for the responsibilities of marrying a princess of the crown? It is no small thing. Quentyn bowed low, swallowing hard. I am, your grace. I will do all in my power to honor her and to strengthen the bonds between the Iron Throne and Sunspear. Rhaegar gently embraced them both. Then let us speak further. We will arrange an official announcement. But for now, welcome to King's Landing, my future son by law. A rare cheer went up from the knights and onlookers in the courtyard. It was a moment of joy, a bright spark in a winter-bound realm. Rhaegar felt a wave of relief, knowing that Rhaenys had found a path of her own choosing, one that might serve both her heart and the realm's stability. Perhaps they would blossom into a couple as dear as Rhaegar and Elia had once been. That very evening, a feast was held in the Great Hall to celebrate Rhaenys' return and her betrothal. The atmosphere glowed with candlelight and music. Servants hurried about, filling goblets with Dornish wine, setting platters of spiced peppers, roasted onions, and succulent meats. Harpists and pipers played soft melodies, and dancers in bright silks performed for the royal court. Aegon sat next to Quentyn, peppering him with questions about his travels, while Rhaenys beamed at them both. It was one of those rare nights when the realm's troubles seemed distant, when possibility shimmered in the air like starlight. Rhaegar, presiding at the high table, felt the warmth of the wine flow through him as he observed the scene. He could almost imagine Elia's presence at his side, her gentle laughter, her proud smile for their daughter. The pain of her loss never truly faded, but tonight he found solace in Rhaenys' happiness. Perhaps this was how families endured, by weaving new joys into the old sorrows, by building upon the foundations of the past without being crushed by them. When the feast wound down, Rhaegar rose and offered a toast. My lords, ladies, and friends, we gather this night in celebration of a union that promises to strengthen our great realm. Let us drink to my daughter, Princess Rhaenys, and Prince Quentyn of Dorne, who have chosen one another in wisdom and affection. May their bond be ever blessed, and may it usher in continued harmony between the crown and Dorne. The company raised their cups, voices echoing their approval. The horns of wine clinked, the music swelled, and Rhaenys and Quentyn exchanged a small, shy smile that betrayed genuine fondness. Rhaegar thought, let this be another stitch in the fabric of peace we have labored so hard to create. After the toast, the revelry continued, but Rhaegar, feeling the pull of fatigue after his arduous journey from the Vale, excused himself. He retreated to his private solar where he lit a single candle and opened a window letting in a breath of cold night air. The celebrations below drifted faintly to his ears, laughter, fiddles, the thrum of drums. His mind swirled with half-formed reflections. Peace was never guaranteed. The Ironborn had shown that. The bandits on the road had shown that. Yet it remained a prize worth defending. If forging marriages and alliances, traveling the realm in winter's teeth, and occasionally drawing steel were the costs, then so be it. He would pay that price. He would continue paying it as long as the realm asked him to. He stood at the window, recalling a younger version of himself, strumming a harp in the ruins of Harrenhal, dreaming of prophecies and destinies. That boy had become a king, one who discovered that real destiny lay not in arcane secrets, but in the hard, patient work of caring for a kingdom. Even so, now and then, Rhaegar still felt the echo of those old visions as if a distant chord reverberated beneath the melody of daily life. He could not say what future storms might roll in, what shadows might gather beyond the horizon. But he knew that with each passing year of his reign, the realm grew more resilient. And if ever the darkness of prophecy did fall, he prayed they would stand united beneath the banner of a kinder, wiser Targaryen dynasty. In time, he doused the candle, letting darkness and moonlight claim the chamber. Tomorrow's tasks would be legion, arranging the formal details of Rhaenys' betrothal, hearing petitions from across the realm, monitoring the step-by-step dissolution of House Greyjoy's ambitions. But tonight he allowed himself a single moment of quiet contentment. The city below slumbered in cautious hope, the castle filled with murmurs of celebration. He thought of his children, Rhaenys forging her own path in love, Aegon studying the kingdom's lore with earnest devotion, each a part of the new generation that would guide Westeros forward long after he was gone. And he thought of the many faces who had stood by him, Ser Arthur Dayne, Jon Connington, Varys, and more, all woven into the tapestry of this realm that had survived a mad king and now thrived under a gentler rule. Finally he lay down upon the bed, the covers drawn tight against the cold. He closed his eyes, hearing only the gentle pulse of his own heartbeat. If the gods were good, he thought, this peace might yet last another year, another decade, or perhaps a generation. And though he knew that all reigns come to an end, he hoped that by the time his own did, he might leave behind a legacy of unity and mercy that would endure far longer than any legend of dragons and flame. The king slept, and in his dreams he saw not a throne of swords, but a kingdom of open hands where even the darkest roads could lead home and where a gentle dragon's wings might shelter all who lived beneath them.